My name is Vanessa Chong, and I'm a clinical psychologist with one of the 4 community clinics in the city. And so today what I'll be doing is discussing a few CBT-based skills that you can add to your own toolkit for both using for yourself and for using with your patients. And this presentation will be available on the specialist link website, and also the toolkit that I'm referring to is actually a document that I prepared a few weeks ago, and it's designed for use with patients, so that's also on the website. Before we get started, I don't have any conflicts of interest to disclose. And as I mentioned, I work at the Northeast Clinic. I feel really lucky to be working on an interdisciplinary team under the management of Helena Bowers. And it just seems like with this crisis, we've really come together. Part of what some of my colleagues and I have been working on over the past few weeks is something we're calling the COVID-19 Toolkit. And we have lots of resources and worksheets for patients to work through. So I'm really excited to be able to share it with you today. So before we get started on the tools that you can use for yourselves and your patients, I wanted to start with a bit of a discussion of resilience. And I really like this quote that is by Nelson Mandela. He says, "The greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall." And I think that that's something we really need to remember in this time of uncertainty in the COVID crisis. And so there are lots of definitions of resilience. There's lots of research out there on resilience, but one of the definitions I like is by the American Psychological Association, and they say that resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. As much as resilience involves bouncing back from these difficult experiences, it can also involve profound personal growth. And so I think that's what I like to focus on today, is how we can capitalize on that and make sure that that personal growth happens. There has been some research on the psychological factors that are linked to resilience, and some of them are listed here. So optimism, positive thinking can contribute to more resilience. Cognitive reappraisal, meaning seeing a benefit or a silver lining that can come out of going through adversity. Active coping, which would be different from passive or avoidant coping. So coming up with some strategies to actually change the quality of the stressor itself, or how the stressor is perceived. Social support is really important. I think we're all trying to find ways to get that for ourselves and for our patients right now. Humor, physical activity. I think we've seen lots of really great examples in Calgary lately of altruism, and that's a big part of resilience. Mindfulness and a sense of purpose. So these are some of the skills I'm discussing today. We'll try to promote some of these psychological factors. And I think the goal is really to both capitalize on the skills that we already have, but also maybe come out with even stronger resilience by developing some new skills to help us weather the storm. So what do we need right now, and what do our patients need right now? I think right now we're going through a period of imbalance. We're trying to find our balance again, because this COVID-19 crisis has kind of shaken things up. And so we need to find a new balance between being gentle and pushing ourselves, rest and productivity, caring for ourselves and caring for others, and distraction, and really reflecting on how we're feeling. We need a sense of control right now, and we can do that by zooming in a little bit. I'm talking to my patients a lot right now about the need to really zoom in and not think too big picture. It's going to be too overwhelming. So being focused on today, tomorrow, this week, maybe this month. We need structure and routine. We need to know that what we're feeling is normal, that, for example, right now, things like sleep are going to be thrown off. We're going to have physical reactions to the stress, and to validate that our reactions are okay. And it is, of course, normal to feel anxious and stressed right now, but if we can minimize any additional sources of stress, we want to do that, and we want to help our patients do that. So one of the metaphors I like to use with my patients is the onion, and I've actually borrowed this from one of my colleagues, Dr. Lori Alley, who's also a psychologist in our clinic. And the idea is that the situation itself is anxiety provoking. The circle on the left represents how much anxiety the COVID-19 situation is creating. But if we add on layers of unhelpful behaviors, unhelpful forms of thinking, like an onion, it can become bigger and bigger. There's extra layers, and the circle on the right represents how much anxiety you could feel if you add on those extra layers. And so one of the first places we start with our patients and perhaps with ourselves as well, is to work on our routines, to give ourselves some structure right now. And I think for patients, it's really difficult sometimes to know where to start and know how to do that. And so in the toolkit, I've included a series of worksheets to help patients do that. So this first worksheet is called the Routine Builder, and it's a kind of brainstorming sheet. And the idea is that we want ourselves and our patients to do one of these types of activities per day. So do one social, one physical, one self-care, one productive, and one pleasurable activity per day. And they don't have to be big activities. They don't have to take a lot of time, but we should try to touch on each of these areas. Now, often patients struggle with knowing what kinds of activities are possible. And so this sheet gives you a place to start. It has some ideas, and they are COVID-19 specific. So, for example, with the social activities, there's ideas that would still maintain physical distancing. And then what you would do after that is use this routine checklist. So it is really helpful for people to track their progress, to actually write it down, to be accountable, but also it's a way to give yourself credit for what you're doing. I even get my clients who I'm working with outside of the COVID crisis to use this, especially for behavioral activation with depression. And so there's a space on here to track your bedtime. So planning a wake-up time and a bedtime. There's a place to track each category of activities I listed earlier. And then there's also a space at the bottom to track some of the your goals for the week. So for example, this week, I want to make sure I go for a walk outside 3 times. There's a few tips that I give my patients when I'm using this checklist with them. So first is to work in the sweet spot. And the sweet spot means that balance between pushing yourself enough without overwhelming yourself. So it's kind of on that edge of your comfort zone. And the rules for the sweet spot are that you are not allowed to compare yourself to where you used to be at a different time in your life, maybe when you're functioning better, and you're not allowed to compare your sweet spot to where other people are. So in choosing your sweet spot, you're looking at where you're at this week. And we also want to help our patients watch out for self-criticism. It can be really easy to get down on yourself if you don't have every box filled out, or if you feel like you're not quite doing enough or that it doesn't quite count. We want to watch out for that with our patients. Now, I have a really talented sister, and she has she works a little bit in graphic design. And so she actually adapted my, my worksheets to her 4-year-old daughter. And so this is an example of how it can be adapted for children. I know there's a lot of little ones out there who are struggling with their routine, and parents struggling with getting them into routine. And so on the left, this is a sticker chart, and you can stick a sticker on each activity as you do it. And then on the right, there's kind of a description of some of the activities that would count under each category. Now, in terms of working on thinking, it can be really helpful as a starting place to differentiate between helpful worry and unhelpful worry. So helpful worry would be when you're worried about something that's a real problem. You have control over the thing that you're worrying about. It motivates you to do something to solve the problem. So it gets you somewhere, and that you can do something about it, and you can do it now. So examples would be, it would probably be pretty good to be worrying about going into a crowded situation at this point, because it's going to motivate you to maintain the 2-meter distance, or maybe avoid those crowded situations altogether. It might be helpful to worry about your teenager not respecting social distancing guidelines, although I'm hearing from some people that that's very difficult to enforce, but that could be a helpful worry. An unhelpful worry is if you are worried about something that's not totally based on facts, you have no control or responsibility about the thing you're worried about, or you can do something but not now, so now is not the time, including when you're trying to fall asleep, for example. That would not be the time to solve the problem. So examples might be, what will happen in the world? Will things ever go back to normal? Or worrying about other people not following the rules because you don't have control over that. So then there's some steps you can go through for that. For helpful worries, it's about doing something, so coming up with a step-by-step plan to solve the problem. And for unhelpful worries, using a skill to bring down the anxiety, so down-regulate, like Dr. Berg talked about last week. So using distraction, mindfulness, or relaxation, and coming up with a plan of what you'll do to manage. I think it's also really helpful to help patients come up with some coping self-talk. So very often one of the problems is underestimating your ability to cope. So coping self-talk is about reminding yourself that you are resilient. Examples might be, it will be okay, together we can do this, this is an adjustment period, you'll get used to it over time, or you've coped with tough things before, you can do it again. So it's really kind of coaching yourself to be able to cope. I suggest to my clients that they make this visuals. So if they write these down, they can put them on a poster, they could put it on a piece of paper or card in their pocket. These days, patients really like putting it in their cell phones. So that might be another option, and to really try to personalize this so that when you need it, you can look at it, and this will help you calm yourself down. I think right now self-criticism can become a big issue too, especially if you've already had a tendency to be self-critical or perfectionistic. It's going to ramp up right now. And the antidote to self-criticism is self-compassion. So this is about being kind to yourself, recognizing you're human, and giving yourself empathy. One of the tips and kind of tricks that I use with my patients is to get them to actually think about a good coach that they had earlier in their lives. So they might think about when they were younger, maybe in high school, and if they had a really good coach on a sports team or a really good teacher, to think about that person and to think about what they would say in this situation. How would they coach them? For yourselves, if you're trying to work on self-compassion, you might even think about what you would say to your patients. I know for myself, I'm often reminding myself of that because I can be much more compassionate to my patients than I am to myself. So some examples could be, you're a good person. It would be weird if you weren't feeling anxious, I think is a really nice and normalizing statement. It's understandable you're struggling, and this isn't normal life, so why would you be operating at 100% right now? I think there's a lot of media use right now, and that's really important because it's important to keep aware of what's happening in the news for patients, especially. I think sometimes patients do need reminders to consider their sources and maybe some direction in which sources might be credible. So places like the Alberta Health Services website, Dr. Hinshaw's updates, they might need some suggestions on the ones to focus on. Setting limits, so that could be setting time limits for media use, making decisions about which sources you use or when you watch. It can be really disruptive to sleep if patients are watching media or using social media right before bedtime. So that might be something to think about. Considering taking a break from social media or certain social media platforms. And I know for things like Facebook, you can actually mute certain Facebook friends' feeds if they're too stressful. I think you can unsubscribe from their feed for a certain amount of time. Consider whether certain sources of social media could have a positive impact on you. So there might be ways to use social media as distraction. For example, you could focus on a recipe Instagram page, or something else that is distracting. Or there's also a movement on Instagram called Good News Movement. And so it's focused on positive news instead of negative news. And I also coach my patients to consider whether social media is adding unnecessary drama to their lives. So there are a lot of debates that people get into online that can really rile them up. There's a lot of trolls out there online who are looking for a fight. And so that might be something to also encourage your your patient to avoid. Some of the relaxation skills that I really like, these are some of my go-to skills, are breathing. So we of course want our patients to be doing diaphragmatic breathing, and I'll use an image of a balloon. So I'll get them to imagine their bellies as a big red balloon, and when they breathe in, they're inflating the balloon. When they breathe out, they're deflating the balloon. And I actually have them hold their stomachs with their hand to feel the difference in their diaphragm. And then the second step with breathing was I'll get them to do something called square breathing, and that's designed to help slow down their breathing. So they're breathing in for a count of, say, 4, holding for 4, breathing out for 4, and then holding for another 4 counts. Grounding can be really useful as well. So grounding is about helping patients turn outward and focus on the present moment. You yourself can also use this in your own practice and in your own life. So one of the classic forms of grounding is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So listing out loud 5 things you can see in the room, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And other more simple forms of grounding could include listing everything in the room that you can see, or as many colors as you can see. And then of course there's some really helpful apps out there, and I think patients would really enjoy these apps because they can play an audio file and it will take them through a relaxation exercise. So all of these ones on the slide here are either free or low cost. A couple of weeks ago, Margie Okander did a presentation, and she talked about mindfulness resources. I just wanted to add a few here that we also refer to in our toolkit. And as a final note, I just wanted to talk a little bit about post-traumatic growth. So in my clinic, one of my special interest areas is trauma work, and I do a trauma group as well in our clinic. And one of the things we talk about is this concept of post-traumatic growth, which comes out of the positive psychology movement. The idea here is that trauma doesn't just create stress, but it can also create some benefits and some growth, appreciation of life. So appreciating your existence, realizing that your relationships were really important to you, or having a deepening of relationships, greater intimacy because of the trauma, more compassion for other people who are also going through difficult things. It might also lead to new possibilities in life, new paths. Perhaps for our patients right now, they're exploring new interests that they might never have explored before. There's personal strength, so a sense of growth and feeling more confident in oneself, and having a stronger faith and understanding of spirituality. So my hope is that we all will come out of this having grown. I think in times of crisis, one of the things that's inspiring to me is seeing the best parts of humanity, and I'm confident that we will grow because of what we're going through. So thank you very much for having me, and I will turn it back over to Rick.
Dr. Chong, a question. Somebody said, what about the role of eating as self-soothing during this difficult time?
Yes, I think that's a big issue. I think this is a place where I would talk about balance. So, you know, a balance between having compassion for yourself that it's maybe not going to be the best right now. It's, you know, I think a lot of us are turning to food for comfort and self-soothing, but at the same time, trying to balance that with using some other strategies instead as well.